Joined us back in July. Nice to see you again, Rob. He is a pollster with Penn, Schoen, and Berland Associates here in Washington, D.C., public opinion pollsters. And they have conducted for us a second survey of American awareness and knowledge of the Supreme Court. Rob, I want to start with a different kind of number because I know this is on your survey. We had a caller that just called up asking us to identify the buildings that we show on the Washington Journal because not very many people travel to Washington. In fact, about the Supreme Court, you asked the question how many people have visited Washington and how many people have come to the Supreme Court. What did you find out? Well,
what we learned was that about 3 in 5 American voters at some time in their lives have visited Washington. And of those, 35%, or about 1 in 5 American voters taken as a whole, about 1 in 5 have at least seen the Supreme Court. Some have toured. I suspect others have sort of seen it from tour buses. But yeah, a lot of Americans have actually seen or been in the Supreme Court building. Well, we're going to enhance the knowledge of the Supreme Court building for those who are interested, like that earlier caller, with our upcoming special on the Supreme Court. It's a documentary about 85 minutes long that will air on October 4th, just before the Supreme Court opens its new term. And that's really what this poll is all about, to tell us a little more about public awareness and knowledge of the Supreme Court. So give us some top-line results. Well, I think the first thing to tell you is that 88% of American voters, essentially 9 in 10, say that the Supreme Court has a very great impact, or a big impact, I should say, on their everyday lives. They understand that what the court does, the decisions they make, the cases they look at, affect their lives in virtually every respect. And given that understanding of its awareness, how much, of its importance, how much awareness did they have about what it actually does? Well, that's a good question. One thing that was a little, I think striking about these results is only 49% of Americans could name a single case that the Supreme Court had been involved with. And of that 49%, 84%, to put it another way, virtually everybody who could name a case could really only name one case, and that was Roe v. Wade. There was very few people could name any other cases. A very distant second was Brown versus Board of Education. We did see that Brown would be mentioned a bit more by younger people, no doubt because of school, recently being in school, younger voters. African Americans were somewhat more aware of Brown versus Board Ed, but the big story here is there's only one case that they've heard a lot about, and that's Roe v. Wade. I want to show a clip from our Supreme Court production with the Chief Justice talking about the effect that the court has on people's lives.
I think it's the prettiest building in Washington, and it's distinctive. It's a different type of marble, just to start with, much brighter, much lighter than the typical government building, which I think is wonderful because immediately as soon as you see it, you appreciate that this is something different. It represents that the court is a different branch of government. And it really is more monumental. It looks a lot more like the Jefferson Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial in terms of its visual impact than it does look like another government building. And if you view it as something of a temple of justice, I think that's entirely appropriate.
Well, that goes to the visitation rather than the role of the court and what the Chief Justice thinks about the way it was designed by Cass Gilbert, the architect, and how it represents its symbolic work, its work symbolically to the public. Coming back to Rob Green of Penn, Schoen, what else do we need to know that's interesting about your survey results of Americans 18 plus who are also cleared for having voted? That's the polling group of 800 people. Well, I think one key finding is that 45% of the voting public, they agree that the Supreme Court justices should serve a lifetime appointment. But of course the reverse is also true. 56% say that in fact they would prefer it was not a lifetime appointment. And in fact we found there was a lot of support for terms as opposed to a lifetime appointment for Supreme Court justices. And what was proposed was an idea that had been floated and covered was an 18-year term. When we looked historically, in fact, the justices end up serving pretty close to that of their own volition. So do you think there's public awareness of that, or what's behind the answer, if you could, about the adaptation of 18-year terms?
Yeah, I saw that, the historical examination, how long at least the 8 justices that have served longer than just a few weeks, that they'd served about 18 years. But what I think was really driving that answer is accountability. That the court is, I think this gets back to our central theme, the court is important enough in their everyday lives that they wish it was somewhat more accountable. And terms would be at least one way to make the court more accountable in the view of the public.
And one more with you, Rob Green, and that is on televised coverage of oral arguments.
Well, that was, we found that essentially 2/3 of American voters would like televised oral arguments. I think this is an idea whose time has come. In one form or fashion, there's almost, I think every state actually, now permits televising their high court. I saw the other day in the paper the British are permitting it now, and they're among the law lords, what's their Supreme Court. We'd looked at that actually also in July, and the number has ticked up a bit even since then. Americans support, American voters in particular, support the idea of oral arguments being broadcast.
When you probe around that number and talk about how the broadcast coverage might be used, is there any change?
Yeah, there is one change. If there would, we see less support for broadcast. It's clear the public would prefer, what they prefer the most would be sort of gavel to gavel, that the broadcast might be cut up and small bits used. When you ask them about that, you know, sort of some court observers say that, you know, this might unfortunately sensationalize things. When you give them choices, you do see less support for television broadcasts, but it's still a majority. So again, the takeaway is as long as it's done responsibly, which I think it's safe to say it's been done in the States without exception, then this is something they'd like to see, you know, with their own Supreme Court. I suppose C-SPAN will be showing the British High Court before it will have any opportunity to show the American High Court, and I think that's a pity in some respects.
Let's listen to Associate Justice Ginsburg talking about the court.
What the public will see eventually is an opinion with reasons. The discipline that a judge follows and what makes judges unlike legislators, we don't just say, I vote that the petitioner should win or I vote that the respondent should win. We have to give reasons for every decision we make.
Again, that is part of the C-SPAN documentary on the Supreme Court, October 4th, the 85-minute version, and then every justice, both current and retired, sat down with us for an interview as part of